Everyone around you appeared to have a clear sense of direction. They chose professions, formed meaningful relationships, and advanced through life with a confidence that seemed natural and effortless. Meanwhile, you watched from the sidelines, carrying a feeling that was difficult to define. It was not quite envy, nor was it simple confusion. It was more like a quiet awareness that the road everyone else was following was never truly meant for you. Yet you could not identify your own path either. So you paused, you explored. You began projects only to abandon them later. As the years passed, the people around you accumulated the visible signs of a successful life. Beneath all your wandering, however, there remained a persistent voice repeating the same message. I am not falling behind. I am simply not ready yet. Carl Jung devoted much of his life to understanding the human psyche, and one of his most overlooked insights was this. Not everyone is meant to flourish early. Some individuals are designed for an entirely different journey. They are built for depth rather than speed, for a life that unfolds in layers rather than in straight, predictable lines. Jung referred to this journey as individuation, and he regarded it as one of the most uncommon and transformative paths a person could follow. Today, I want to explain why those who feel most disconnected from their own timeline are often the very people who eventually step most fully into their lives. First, your inner world may be too powerful for early adaptation. Most people construct their identity in the quickest possible way. They absorb the expectations around them. They adopt values, ambitions, goals, and schedules from their environment. This approach works well enough. It often creates confidence early on, though it frequently rests on fragile foundations. Rare personalities function differently. Their inner world is exceptionally alive. Thoughts, emotions, intuitions, and symbols interact with a force and complexity that most people never experience. Jung described this condition as a psyche in which the unconscious remains highly active. The challenge this creates early in life is significant. When the inner world speaks more loudly than the outer one, adaptation becomes difficult. You cannot simply become what society expects you to become, not because you are rebellious or stubborn, but because something within you rejects false alignment. Long before you can express it clearly, some deeper part of you recognizes that becoming exactly what others expect would require sacrificing something essential. It senses that such a compromise would come at too great a cost. As a result, you hesitate. Decisions that seem easy for others become complicated for you. Careers, relationships, even identity itself. From the outside, this often appears as uncertainty. From within, however, it feels more like suffocation. Jung warned that forcing someone into an identity before it is ready does not create success. It creates fragmentation. A life shaped incorrectly will eventually begin to crack. Your hesitation was never a weakness. It was your psyche protecting a self that was still in the process of becoming. Second, the delay is not stagnation, it is incubation. During your 20s, the contrast likely became painful. Others seemed to be progressing. They earned promotions, got married, developed confidence, and built visible momentum. Meanwhile, you felt stuck. Perhaps you moved from one path to another without settling. Perhaps you withdrew into solitude. Perhaps from the outside, you looked like someone who never truly got started. Jung would interpret that period differently. He would argue that your psyche was engaged in invisible work. While others were constructing social identities, you were constructing psychological foundations. You were wrestling with questions most people do not face until much later in life. Who am I really? Which of my beliefs are truly mine and which were inherited? What am I no longer willing to pretend about? These questions slow your progress, but they protect your future. Jung observed that many individuals who achieve success early experience an inner collapse later, a midlife crisis, a sense of emptiness beneath their accomplishments. The realization that the life they built may have looked correct from the outside, but never truly fit who they were. Rare personalities pay a different price. They pay it sooner, in confusion, uncertainty, wandering, and the loneliness of feeling out of place while everyone else appears to belong. Yet they avoid paying the same price later because they never built their lives on foundations borrowed from others. Third, you perceive things that many people need to believe. This is one of the most isolating features of this personality type. and one of the least discussed. From an early age, you noticed realities that others overlooked. You saw the distance between what people said and what they actually meant. You recognized the subtle social games beneath ordinary interactions. You sensed the emptiness hidden within goals that others pursued with sincere conviction. Jung referred to this as the burden of consciousness. Greater awareness often brings greater suffering. When you can see through the illusions that help others function, participation becomes much more complicated. How do you compete in a game that feels meaningless? How do you pursue status that you do not genuinely respect? How do you display enthusiasm for a life that feels hollow at its core? As a result, you withdrew, not always outwardly, but psychologically. Others interpreted this withdrawal as passivity, a lack of ambition, or evidence that something was wrong with you. In reality, Jung believed the psyche would often undermine external success if that success threatened inner integrity. Your soul was not malfunctioning. It was resisting participation in something that felt fundamentally untrue. Pause for a moment here, because an important point needs to be made before we continue. If you have spent years feeling late, disconnected, or as though you missed the opportunity everyone else seemed to find naturally, consider this carefully. The timeline you inherited was not designed for you. It was created for a different kind of person, someone who builds identity through absorption rather than questioning, someone for whom speed is an advantage rather than a threat to something deeper. You are not behind, you are simply operating according to a different rhythm. And that rhythm, which may resemble failure from the outside, often leads somewhere the faster route rarely reaches. Stay with me. Fourth, loneliness is not merely a side effect. It is a developmental phase. For this personality type, loneliness is almost built into the process. Their inner complexity makes superficial connection feel more painful than complete solitude. They may feel like outsiders even among people who genuinely appreciate them. They may feel unseen within groups and unreachable even in close relationships because what they carry internally does not translate easily into the language of everyday social interaction. This loneliness often reaches its peak in the late 20s or early 30s, and Jung saw this as a decisive stage. Many rare personalities break at this point. They numb themselves. They conform. They exchange the self that is emerging for the comfort of finally belonging somewhere. Jung was remarkably clear about the cost of this choice. Betraying the developing self creates a shadow that can follow someone for decades. Resentment, bitterness, and a quiet hostility toward the version of themselves they became in order to be accepted. Those who endure the loneliness without surrendering experience something that cannot be taught and cannot be rushed. They stop measuring themselves through external approval. They stop competing against timelines that never belonged to them. For the first time, they begin listening to something deeper within themselves. This is where true formation begins. Fifth, the turning point. What emergence actually looks like. Somewhere during the mid-30s, a subtle shift often occurs. Not dramatically and not necessarily in a way that others immediately notice, but internally something settles. Clarity gradually replaces the anxiety that had become so familiar, you no longer recognized it as anxiety. Self-trust begins to replace endless comparison. Depth takes the place of urgency. The need to appear somewhere you are not yet fades away. You stop asking who you should become and start inhabiting who you already are. Because this identity was not borrowed, because it was forged through years of unseen inner work. It possesses qualities that borrowed identities lack: weight, stability, and a grounded presence that others sense before they can explain it. Jung believed this is the stage at which the rare personality truly enters life, not as someone still searching for a place to fit, but as someone who no longer needs to fit anywhere specific. That shift changes everything. Their words carry influence not because they speak frequently, but because every word has purpose. Their presence shapes a room without effort. Their decisions become precise because they arise from alignment rather than fear. This is not confidence in the conventional sense. It is something quieter, deeper, and far more enduring. It is coherence, an inner world too rich for early adaptation, years of incubation mistaken for stagnation, the burden of seeing beyond beliefs that others needed to hold, a loneliness that was actually part of development, and an emergence that arrives late, quietly, and without the celebration that often accompanies early achievement. Jung believed that the rarest personalities embody something the world desperately needs and rarely recognizes in time. A person who refuses to exchange depth for speed, who refuses to sacrifice truth for approval, who refuses to build a life upon foundations they neither chose nor believe in. The success that emerges from this path rarely arrives with fanfare. Unlike some forms of early success, it does not decay from within. Instead, it expresses the individual rather than consuming them. And perhaps most importantly, it provides something few people ever experience: the feeling that your life genuinely belongs to you, that everything that happened, including the years that appeared unproductive, was preparation rather than waste. If you have always felt late, perhaps you are not behind at all. Perhaps you are simply early for a different kind of life, a life that cannot be rushed into existence, a life that becomes possible only after you stop trying to be anyone other than yourself. Which part of this felt most familiar to you, as though it describes something you had lived but never been able to articulate? Share it in the comments. The people reading your words are walking a similar path, and your modesty may help transform that path from something that feels like wandering into something that feels like direction.